He lived one floor above me for 8 months and never said a single word to me. Not good morning, not excuse me, not even a nod in the hallway. Now it was 12:17 in the morning and his knuckles were on my door. Hey, welcome back, or welcome for the very first time. You've just stumbled into the best corner of the internet for MM Omegaverse BL audio stories. We're talking drama, slow burn, sassy amigas, and endings that are earned. Hit subscribe, get comfortable, and let's get into it. I stared through the peephole like it had personally betrayed me. My name is Ezra Monroe, and I have exactly 3 rules for surviving life as an unmated Omega in Columbia, Maryland. Rule 1. Never let anyone smell your suppressants. The moment they know you are masking your scent, they start asking questions you do not owe them answers to. Rule 2. Never touch strangers' belongings. Not wallets, not keys, not abandoned coffee mugs. My psychometry is not a party trick. And the last time I grabbed someone's forgotten umbrella at a grocery store, I spent 2 hours processing a stranger's entire divorce in real time, with feelings. Rule 3. Mind your business. I was excellent at rules 1 and 2. Rule 3 had always been the tricky one. I moved into the ground floor unit of the Western property 11 months ago, right after my last apartment complex got converted into overpriced condos, and I had exactly 19 days to find somewhere new. Diane Weston had been the one to show me around. She was polished, pleasant, and had the kind of smile that felt like a press release. Everything about the unit was clean and affordable, and I needed it desperately, so I signed the lease before she even finished the tour. I did not meet Callum Weston until 4 days later. He had been coming down the stairs as I was coming in from the parking lot, arms full of grocery bags, keys between my teeth. He stopped on the 3rd step. I stopped in the doorway. We looked at each other for exactly 2 seconds. Then he walked past me without a word. Not rude, not warm, just absent. Like I was furniture he had already categorized and decided required no further processing. I told myself it did not bother me. I was lying through every single tooth in my head. Because here is the thing about being an Omega with psychometry. I do not need to touch a person to feel the weight of them. There is something that radiates off people, especially alphas, a kind of atmospheric pressure I have never been able to fully explain. Most alphas felt like weather systems, loud fronts, incoming storms, the kind of energy that announced itself before they even entered a room. Callum Weston felt like the moment right before lightning, still, charged, waiting. And he smelled like cedar and cold rain, which my suppressant-fogged senses had absolutely no business registering as clearly as they did. I registered it every single time. 8 months of hallway silence followed. 8 months of him collecting packages left at the front door and placing them neatly outside my unit without knocking. 8 months of hearing his footsteps above me at strange hours, 3 in the morning sometimes, slow and deliberate, like a man who had forgotten how to sleep and was no longer embarrassed about it. Diane had been perfectly cordial throughout all of it. She collected rent on the 1st, texted about maintenance issues with the efficiency of someone running a small corporation, and occasionally left baked goods outside my door with little handwritten notes that were almost aggressively cheerful. She was the face of this arrangement. He was the silence underneath it. Then, 3 weeks ago, I heard them arguing through my ceiling. I was not trying to listen. I want that on the record. But my unit sat directly below theirs. The walls in this building were not exactly soundproofed, and when an alpha raises his voice even slightly, it carries. I did not catch words, just tone. His voice low and strained, pulling at something. Hers sharp, then suddenly quiet in a way that felt more like a decision than a surrender. 2 days later, Diane's car was gone. Not temporarily, gone. The planters she kept on the 2nd floor landing were gone too. The mail she used to sort at the front table. The faint trace of her floral perfume that used to drift down the stairwell every morning. A week of silence, from upstairs followed. Then, another. I minded my business. Rule 3. I was genuinely trying. Until 12:17 this morning, when someone knocked on my door. 3 knocks, unhurried, like he had thought carefully about each one before he made it. I looked through the peephole. Callum Weston stood in the hallway, wearing a grey t-shirt and bare feet, hair slightly undone, jaw tight, with an expression I had never once seen on his face in 8 months of shared square footage. He looked completely lost. My hand was already on the door handle before my brain caught up and raised the very reasonable question of what exactly a man who never once acknowledged your existence could possibly want from you at midnight. I opened the door anyway, and immediately regretted it, because up close, Callum Weston was significantly more problematic than he was through a peephole. He was tall in the way that felt architectural, like someone had designed him specifically to fill a doorframe and ruin an Omega's carefully maintained sense of emotional stability. The grey t-shirt was doing absolutely nothing to help. Neither was the fact that without the usual distance of a hallway or a parking lot between us, his scent hit me like a physical thing. Cedar, cold rain. Something underneath it that I did not have a name for yet, but that my suppressant dulled instincts were already trying to file and categorize against my will. I gripped the door with one hand and looked up at him. He looked back at me. Neither of us said anything for 4 full seconds, which in midnight doorway time is roughly equivalent to a small eternity. "You opened it," he said finally. "That is traditionally what people do when someone knocks," I said. Was I supposed to interpret the knocking differently? Send a carrier pigeon back? Slide a note under the door? Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like the idea of one visiting briefly and deciding it was not the right time. "I saw your light was on," he said. "I was reading. At midnight. Some of us have insomnia and coping mechanisms, Callum." I had never actually used his name out loud before. It landed strangely, too familiar, and I watched him register it. "Is there something you need, or did you come downstairs specifically to audit my sleep schedule?" He exhaled. It was not quite a sigh. More like something he had been holding for a while finally found a small exit. "I locked myself out," he said. I stared at him. He stared back. "You locked yourself out," I repeated. The spare key was on Diane's ring, and there it was. The name dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water. He said it with the practiced steadiness of someone who had been rehearsing neutrality. But there was something underneath it that my psychometry had no business picking up without physical contact, and yet somehow still caught the edge of. A weight. The specific kind of weight that comes from saying a name you are still learning to say without flinching. I should have said something sympathetic. Something measured and neighbourly. "So let me understand this," I said instead. "You have lived above me for 8 months. 8 months of 0 words. No good morning, no hello, no sorry about the noise at 2 a.m. Even though I could hear you pacing, like a man practicing to become a ghost. And the first conversation we are having is because you walked out of your own apartment without your keys." His jaw tightened. "Monroe, I am just establishing a timeline. Do you have the building manager's number? It is midnight. I am aware. Gary is not going to answer at midnight. Gary barely answers at noon. Gary once took 4 days to respond to a maintenance request about a broken heater in January." I tilted my head. "I have a couch." He blinked. "It pulls out," I added. "It is not luxurious, but it is horizontal, which seems like what you need right now." Callum looked at me with an expression I could not fully decode. Something between wariness and exhaustion. 2 things that had clearly been sharing space in him for longer than just tonight. He glanced back up the stairwell, like he was weighing the option of sleeping against his own door, and apparently the math did not work in the hallway's favour. "I do not want to impose," he said. "Then you should have grabbed your keys," I said cheerfully, and stepped aside. He came in slowly, the way cautious people enter unfamiliar spaces. Taking in the reading lamp I had left on, the book open face down on the cushion. The small mess of my life, arranged with the specific organized chaos of someone who lived alone and had stopped performing tidiness for imaginary guests. I watched him look at my shelves. 3 rows of books, a small succulent I had named Gerald, and a collection of objects I kept specifically because they had good histories stored in them. A smooth river stone from a road trip a kind couple had taken through New England. A vintage harmonica that hummed with decades of happy Sundays. Things I had touched once and kept, because sometimes a person needed to hold something that felt like joy that belonged to somebody else. His gaze stopped on a set of keys hanging by my door. Not mine. Old ones, attached to a small copper tag, engraved with the Western property address. Emergency spares, I said, before he could ask. Diane left them the first month in case of a maintenance situation. I forgot I still had them. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had heard all night. Callum looked at those keys for a long moment. He did not reach for them. He just looked at them the way people look at things that remind them of something they are not ready to talk about yet. A photograph left face down. A voicemail not yet deleted. Then he looked away. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For the couch. Do not thank me yet. The pull-out mechanism sticks a little on the left side. You have to lift and push simultaneously, or it sounds like a small aircraft taking off, and I have neighbors." He sat down on the edge of the couch with the careful deliberateness of a man whose body had stopped trusting comfort, like he had forgotten the basic sequence of it. Sit, breathe, stop holding everything at once. I grabbed a spare pillow from the hall closet and a blanket that had seen better days but was genuinely warm, and dropped them on the cushion beside him. He looked at the blanket. It had small geometric shapes on it, in blue and gold. "It was on sale," I said, preemptively defensive. I was not going to say anything. "Your face was." The idea of a smile visited again. This time it stayed a half-second longer before it left. I should have gone back to my room. That was the sensible, Rule 3 compliant thing to do. Offer the couch, hand over the blanket, wish him a functional night's sleep, and remove myself from the situation before my psychometry started picking up information I had not consented to receive. Instead, I sat down in the armchair across from him, tucked my feet under me, and picked up my book. "You do not have to stay up," he said. "I told you. Insomnia. You are not keeping me from anything." He watched me for a moment. "You always read this late?" "I always do something this late. Reading is the productive version. The non-productive version involves watching documentary rabbit holes about historical disasters until 4 a.m., which is deeply unhealthy, and I do it anyway." "What are you reading?" I turned the cover toward him. He leaned forward slightly to read the title, and for one very inconvenient second, he was close enough that his scent cut through my suppressants with the kind of casual confidence that had absolutely no respect for personal boundaries. Cedar, rain, and something warmer underneath, something that had no business being warm at this hour, in this context, on this man. I pulled the book back and looked at the page very intently. "Literary fiction," he said, settling back. "Problem? No, I just did not expect it." "What did you expect?" He considered that. "I do not know. I do not know much about you. That is a natural consequence of never speaking to me," I said pleasantly. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology for that." I looked up from my book. "Diane handled the property," he said. It was not an excuse the way he said it. More like an honest explanation of a system that had been in place long before I arrived. I was not involved in the day-to-day. I travel for work. I was not home much. I noticed. I should have at least introduced myself. "You should have," I agreed. "But you are here now, which is genuinely the most surprising development of my entire tenancy." He looked at his hands. They were resting on his knees, loose and still, and I noticed for the first time that his left ring finger was bare. Not recently bare. The kind of bare that comes from a ring removed and not replaced, where the skin has already started forgetting the weight it used to carry. My psychometry prickled. I did not look at his hands. I looked very aggressively at my book. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "At the property." 11 months. "And before that?" "An apartment in Baltimore that got converted into condos by people who I can only assume have never needed affordable housing in their lives." I turned a page I had not actually read. "I found this place 19 days before I would have been out of options. Diane was very efficient with the paperwork." Something crossed his face at her name. Quick and private, there and gone. "She was good at that," he said. Was. Past tense. Easy and unprompted. I set my book down slowly. "Can I ask something?" He looked at me. "And you can absolutely say no. It is midnight. We barely know each other, and I am fully aware this is a strange situation." "Ask," he said. "Are you okay?" It was possibly the simplest question in the English language. 4 letters, 1 syllable, no complexity whatsoever. And yet the way it landed on him was something I was not prepared for, like it had come from a direction he had not thought to defend. His jaw worked. He looked at the blanket with the geometric shapes. His throat moved. "Not particularly," he said at last. "Okay," I said. "Just that. Okay." No follow-up, no pressure, no crowbar applied to the conversation. He exhaled again, that same long release from before. "Thank you," he said, "for not asking more than that." "I have a policy," I said, picking my book back up. "People tell you what they need to tell you when they are ready. Pushing just makes them better at locking doors." The lamp hummed softly. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, headlights sweeping across the window, and gone. Callum Weston leaned back against my couch cushions and closed his eyes, and I sat 3 feet away reading the same paragraph 4 times in a row, acutely aware of every quiet breath he took. This, I thought with tremendous resignation, was going to be a problem. Not because Callum Weston was dangerous, not because having a strange alpha on my couch at midnight violated approximately every personal boundary I had constructed over the last 3 years of carefully managed solitude, but because he was quiet in a way that felt lived in, comfortable almost, like his silence was not the cold, dismissive kind I had catalogued over 8 months of hallway non-interactions. This silence was different. This one had texture, warmth at the edges, the kind that settles into a room and makes it harder to remember why you preferred being alone. That was significantly more threatening than hostility would have been. I read the same paragraph for the 5th time and accepted that I was not actually reading. His breathing had slowed. Not sleep exactly, but the shallow edge of it. That specific frequency of a body that has been running on fumes finally being given permission to stop moving for 5 consecutive minutes. I should have turned the lamp down. I did not turn the lamp down. Instead, I sat there with my book and my losing battle, and watched him from my peripheral vision like a person who had definitely not spent 8 months cataloguing the atmospheric pressure of a man who never once looked at him directly. Then his hand slipped off his knee. It dropped to the cushion beside him, open and relaxed, palm facing up in the specific vulnerability of a person who has fallen asleep without meaning to. And because the universe has a truly vicious sense of humor, his fingertips landed on the edge of my throw blanket. Contact, not with me. With the blanket, an object I had touched approximately 900 times. My psychometry does not care about technical distinctions. The vision hit me sideways and fast, the way they always do when I am not braced for them. Not a full sequence, more like a photograph that had been left in the rain, blurred at the edges but devastating in the center. A kitchen, morning light. 2 mugs on a counter, one pushed to the far side, untouched and cooling. A voice saying something I could not hear, but that landed in the room with the specific weight of a sentence said too many times to still mean anything. And Callum at the table, hands wrapped around his mug, not drinking, just sitting with the specific stillness of a man who has learned that moving changes nothing. Then the photograph dissolved. I blinked, pressed my back harder into the armchair, breathed through my nose and waited for the residual sensation to pass the way I always did, quiet and practiced, and hoping my face had not done anything embarrassing in the process. Callum had not moved, still breathing at the shallow edge of sleep, still unaware. I looked at him for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then I got up quietly, turned the lamp to its lowest setting, and went to the kitchen to make tea. I did not particularly want, but needed something to do with my hands that was not accidentally reading the entire emotional biography of my landlord's estranged husband through soft furnishings. The kettle was just starting to hiss when his voice came from the living room. "Monroe, not asleep then? Or not anymore?" "Still here," I called back. "Do you want tea? Or are you the kind of person who thinks hot beverages at midnight are unreasonable?" A pause. "What kind?" "Chamomile. It is either calming or useless, depending on your personal philosophy." Another pause. "Sure." I made 2 mugs, which I had clearly already been planning to do because I had already gotten 2 mugs out of the cabinet, which I chose not to examine too closely. When I came back, he was sitting upright, elbows on his knees, rubbing the back of his neck with one hand. His hair had shifted from slightly undone to genuinely dishevelled, and he looked, very specifically, like a man who had just accidentally fallen asleep on a near stranger's couch and was now doing the internal arithmetic of how to be a normal human being about it. I handed him his mug and sat back in my chair. "You did not have to do that," he said. "Correct. I am an agent of free will. I do things because I choose to." I wrapped both hands around my own mug. "How long has she been gone?" He looked at me over the rim of his mug. "The planters disappeared 3 weeks ago," I said. I noticed. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he might choose not to answer. That was fine. I had made my tea. I had options. 26 days, he said. "Did she leave, or did you ask her to?" The question landed cleanly in the room. Not cruel. Just direct. The way questions are when it is late, and 2 people are sharing chamomile tea, and the usual social scaffolding has been quietly disassembled by circumstance. "Mutual," he said finally, which is a word people use when the actual answer is complicated and neither person wants to assign blame out loud. That is a remarkably self-aware thing to say. I have had 26 days of insomnia to work on it. I almost smiled. He caught the edge of it. "We had been unhappy for a long time," he said. And the words came out like they had been rehearsed in private and had finally found a room willing to receive them. Not dramatically, not loudly, just the slow kind of unhappy that creeps in when 2 people stop telling each other the truth about how they feel. He looked at his mug. "She is a good person. She deserves someone who actually wants to be there. And you did not want to be there." "I wanted to want to be." He said it quietly, like a confession with no priest to receive it. "That is not the same thing. And she figured that out before I was brave enough to say it." The lamp hummed. Outside, the neighborhood had gone fully still, the particular deep quiet of a Maryland street at nearly 2 in the morning, when even the dogs have given up. "Ezra," I said. He looked up. "My name, since we are apparently doing this now." I gestured vaguely at the space between us, the mugs, the midnight, the honesty collecting in the corners of the room. "You keep calling me Monroe. It makes me feel like I am being professionally evaluated." Something genuinely warm moved across his face then. Not the idea of a smile, an actual one, brief and a little raw, like it had not been used recently and needed a moment to remember how. "Ezra," he said. My name in his voice was an entirely different experience than I had budgeted for. I took a long sip of my tea and looked at the wall. It was a perfectly good wall. Neutral beige, one framed print, of a Maryland landscape I had bought at a farmer's market 2 summers ago. 0 emotional complications. Exactly the kind of thing a person should look at when their landlord's estranged alpha husband has just said their name in a voice that had absolutely no right to sound like that. Callum did not seem to notice my temporary relocation into wall-focused neutrality. He was looking at his tea with the contemplative energy of a man assembling his next sentence carefully, checking each word for structural integrity before committing. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You just did." He looked up. "Sorry," I said. "Not very sorry." "Reflex. Go ahead." "You have lived here 11 months. You work from home, I think. I have seen your light on at odd hours, heard you moving around." He paused. "And you have never once come upstairs. Never knocked. Never complained about noise. Your pacing was loud, but rhythmically consistent. I adapted. Most tenants would have said something. I am not most tenants. I am a very specific and particular tenant who minds his business with Olympic-level discipline. I lowered my mug most of the time. Why the suppressants? The question arrived without warning and landed squarely in the center of the room. I went very still. Not dramatically. Not in a way that announced itself. Just the specific internal stillness of a person who has been asked the question they have a prepared answer for and is now deciding whether to use it. "That is a significant gear shift," I said. "I noticed them the first week," he said. Not accusatory, factual. The voice of a man who had catalogued things too, apparently, from a different floor. The scent. It is pharmaceutical, consistent. Observant of you for someone who never spoke to me. "I did not say I was not paying attention," he said quietly. "I said I was not home much." I looked at him. He looked back. There was something in the steadiness of his gaze that made the prepared answer feel too thin for the room we were currently sitting in, too rehearsed. Too much armor for a conversation that had already gotten this honest, without either of us planning for it. "I have psychometry," I said. He was quiet. "Object reading," I continued, because most people needed the translation. I touch things and I absorb their history. Emotional residue, memories, significant moments stored in the physical. It is not voluntary, and it is not always pleasant, and it scales with emotional intensity, which means crowded spaces and strangers' belongings, and basically any uncontrolled environment is a continuous exercise in other people's feelings arriving in my body without my consent. I took a breath. The suppressants reduce my scent output, so alphas do not make assumptions about my designation or my availability. But they also slightly dull my psychometry threshold, which is the part that actually matters to me on a practical daily basis. Callum processed this with the careful attention of someone filing information rather than reacting to it. "That sounds exhausting," he said finally. "It has its moments. Is it happening now?" I considered lying. It would have been so easy, smooth and clean and completely unnecessary, which is why I did not do it. "Edges of it," I said. "You have been on my couch. You touched my blanket. I got about 4 seconds of your kitchen at some point this month before I could shut it down." I kept my voice even and clinical because that was the only register in which I could discuss this without feeling like I was handing someone a piece of myself I had not offered. Nothing invasive. "I am not reading you. I would not do that without consent." "But you could, theoretically. If I touch something with significant emotional charge that belongs to you, yes. But I do not do that to people." I met his eyes directly. I have rules about what I do with what I can do. The first one is consent. The second is that people's private histories are not my information to access just because I technically have the ability. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he set his mug down on the coffee table, reached into the pocket of his sweatpants, and placed something between us on the cushion. AK. Small, old, brass, different from the modern ones. The kind cut decades ago, worn smooth at the edges from years of handling. "That was my father's," he said. "He gave it to me before he died. I have carried it for 11 years. I stared at it. "You said consent," he said. "So I am asking. If you want to know who I actually am before this conversation goes any further, that key will tell you more than I probably could tonight." My chest did something complicated and uninvited. "Callum, you do not have to," he said immediately. "I am not asking you to perform anything. I just thought." He stopped, exhaled. "I have been a stranger to you for 8 months, and that was not fair given that you live in my building. If there is a way to be less of one without me having to be articulate at 2 in the morning, I was offering it." I looked at the key. 11 years of daily contact meant 11 years of emotional imprinting. Whatever was stored in that metal was dense and layered, and absolutely none of my business. I reached out and picked it up anyway. The vision came in slowly this time, which was unusual. Not the rain-damaged photograph of before, something more like a film reel, patient and unspooling. A man with Callum's jaw and tired eyes, standing in a hospital corridor, pressing the key into a younger Callum's palm and closing both hands around it, not speaking, just holding. The way people hold things when words have stopped being adequate. Callum at a graveside in winter, coat too thin for the weather, the key in his fist inside his pocket, pressed against his palm like a compass point. Callum in a car parked outside a building I did not recognize, not going in, just sitting with the key on the dashboard and his forehead against the steering wheel, breathing through something I recognized the shape of even without the full context. Loneliness. The specific kind that lives in a person who has spent so long being the one who holds everything together that they have genuinely forgotten what it feels like to be held. I set the key down. My throat was doing something inconvenient. "Your father loved you very much," I said, because that was the truest and safest sentence available to me right now. "And you have been carrying a lot of weight for a very long time." Callum looked at the key on the cushion between us. "Yeah," he said softly, "I have." The lamp hummed. My tea had gone lukewarm. Somewhere outside a night bird called once and went silent. "You should try to sleep," I said. "The couch is actually comfortable once you stop thinking about it." Ezra. "Still here. Thank you." He said it the way people say things they mean past the point of social courtesy, weighted, real, for opening the door. I stood up, collected both mugs, and carried them to the kitchen so he would not see my face doing whatever it was currently doing. "Rule 3, I said from the kitchen doorway. "I mind my business." "You are not very good at it," he said. "No," I agreed. "I really am not." I put the mugs in the sink and stood there for a moment, with the faucet running cold over my hands, which was less about rinsing anything and more about giving myself 30 seconds of sensory reset. The key vision was still sitting in my chest like an uninvited guest who had arrived with luggage. That happened sometimes with objects that carried significant emotional weight. The images faded, but the feeling lingered, ambient and textured, like the emotional equivalent of a song stuck in your head. I knew the shape of Callum's loneliness now, in a way I had not consented to know it. And the problem with knowing the shape of something is that it becomes very difficult to pretend you do not recognize it when it is sitting on your couch. I turned the faucet off, dried my hands, and gave myself a firm internal instruction to be a normal, functional person for the remainder of this evening. I walked back to the doorway. He had pulled the blanket over himself without unfolding the pullout, which was probably wise given that the mechanism genuinely did sound like a small aircraft when deployed. He was on his side, facing the room, eyes not quite closed. The lamp was still at its lowest setting, casting everything in the specific amber of almost dark. He looked younger like this. Not young exactly, but less constructed. The careful neutrality he wore in hallways and parking lots had come off, along with his certainty about his own living arrangements. And what was underneath it was just a tired man in a borrowed blanket who had said more honest things in the last 2 hours than I suspected he had said in months. "You are still standing in the doorway," he said without fully opening his eyes. "I'm assessing the situation." "What is the situation?" "You on my couch. Me being an objectively excellent host despite zero prior notice or preparation." I leaned against the doorframe. "The situation is fine. Go to sleep." "I am not good at it." "Sleeping?" "Falling asleep. Once I am out, I am fine. The getting there part has been," he paused, "difficult. Recently. 26 days of insomnia." I did the quiet math on what that did to a person and felt something shift very slightly in the region of my better judgment. "Do you want me to keep the lamp on?" I said. He opened his eyes fully then and looked at me across the room. It was a direct look, the kind that did not perform anything, and it landed with the specific weight of a person deciding whether to be honest about a small and human thing. "If it is not an inconvenience," he said. "It is not." I pushed off the doorframe and went to my room, leaving the lamp on. I lay on my bed with my ceiling and my thoughts, and the full working knowledge that I was not going to sleep for a minimum of 2 more hours, and that this was entirely the fault of cedar and cold rain and a brass key that had been carried for 11 years. My psychometry had never worked quite like that before. The consent element, he had handed me the key deliberately, framed as an offering, and something about the intentionality of it had changed the texture of the vision. Less like being ambushed by someone else's history, and more like being invited into it. The distinction mattered in ways I did not have clinical language for yet. I was still turning that over when I heard him shift on the couch. Then quiet. Then the specific quality of silence that means someone has finally, actually fallen asleep. I stared at my ceiling and thought about the kitchen in the vision. The 2 mugs, one pushed away, the sentence said too many times to still mean anything. I thought about what kind of slow and quiet unhappiness produced that specific image. 2 people in a morning kitchen with coffee going cold, occupying the same space without actually reaching it. I thought about Diane's handwritten notes. Aggressive cheerfulness that made slightly more sense now in retrospect. I thought about Callum at a graveside in winter, with a key in his fist, alone in the specific way of someone who would not ask for company even if they needed it. I was building a picture I had not been commissioned to build, which was the problem with psychometry and empathy in combination. They did not ask permission to assemble things. They just did it, quietly and persistently, until you had a portrait of a person, assembled from fragments and residue, and 32 words said honestly over chamomile tea. I closed my eyes. What I should do, I told myself, was get through tonight, return the spare key in the morning, and re-establish the comfortable, mutual non-acknowledgement that had served us both fine for 8 months. What I was actually going to do was a different and more complicated question. I was still not asleep when the sun started suggesting itself at the edges of my curtains. But somewhere in the early grey of it, warm and quiet and smelling faintly of cedar drifting from the living room, I finally got close. The lamp was still on. I had not dreamed, which was, for me, something close to peace. And then I heard it. Not the couch, not footsteps. A knock at my front door. 3 of them, precise, familiar, except Callum was already inside my apartment. My eyes opened. The knock came again. 3 of them. The same deliberate rhythm as last night, which meant either this building had developed a very specific haunting, or someone had learned that particular knock from the man currently asleep on my couch. I was out of bed before I made the conscious decision to be. The hallway between my room and the front door was approximately 12 feet, and I crossed it with the specific dread of someone who already knows, on a cellular level, that whatever is on the other side of this door is going to cost them something. I looked through the peephole. Diane Weston stood in the hallway. She was dressed with the careful precision of someone who had put themselves together deliberately before arriving. Blazer, hair neat, the kind of composed exterior that required active maintenance. She was carrying a single box, not large, the kind that held a curated selection of belongings rather than everything. She had not been here in 26 days. She was here now, at what my phone informed me was 6:47 in the morning. I looked back at the living room. Callum was still asleep. The blanket had shifted. One arm was out, hanging loose off the couch cushion, his father's key on the coffee table where I had left it, catching the early light. I looked at the door. I looked at the living room. I was not a religious person, but I said something very specific and unprintable in the general direction of the universe before I opened the door. Diane's expression when she saw me was politely neutral, professional, the press release smile, slightly abbreviated for early morning. "Ezra," she said warmly, "I am so sorry to come by at this hour. I still have a few things upstairs, and I wanted to get them before." She stopped. Her eyes had moved past me. I did not turn around. I did not need to. I could feel the exact moment she registered the shoes by the door. Callum's shoes, large and unmistakably specific, sitting next to my considerably smaller ones, with the casual domesticity of objects that have been placed by someone who felt comfortable enough to take them off. The quality of her stillness changed. "He is here," she said. "Not a question." "He locked himself out last night," I said, which was true, complete, and apparently entirely insufficient as sentences go, because Diane's eyes moved from the shoes to my face with an expression I was not fully equipped to interpret. At 6:47 in the morning, on approximately 3 hours of fractured sleep. "I see," she said. "It is not." I stopped, because I had been about to say, "It is not what it looks like." And the problem with that sentence is that it always sounds like it is exactly what it looks like, regardless of the actual facts of the situation. "He knocked at midnight because Gary does not answer calls after 9, and the spare key was on your ring. He slept on the couch. I made chamomile tea." That is the complete and accurate accounting of last night. Diane looked at me for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression. The press release smile did not return. What replaced it was something quieter and more real, something I had not seen on her face in 11 months of pleasant professional interactions, and it reoriented my understanding of her so fast I felt slightly dizzy. "Ezra," she said quietly, "how long have you known him? We met properly last night, for the first time, but you have lived here for 11 months. "He was not home much," I said, "and when he was, he did not speak to me, which I think you might already know." Her jaw tightened slightly. "I know," she said. Something in her tone pulled at a thread I had not known was loose. "Diane." "I asked him not to," she said, simply, directly, without the cheerful professional scaffolding she had been wearing for our entire acquaintance. "I told him to keep his distance from you specifically. I said it was a liability thing. Landlord-tenant professional boundaries." He stared at her. She met my eyes without flinching, which I respected even as every other feeling I was currently having was becoming very loud and very complicated. "Why?" I said. "Because he noticed you," she said. "The first week you moved in. He came home for 2 days, which was rare, and I watched him notice you in that parking lot, and I recognized the look." She exhaled. Steady and deliberate. I knew what it meant, and I was not ready to have the conversation it would have started. The apartment was very quiet. My psychometry was pressing against my fingertips with the specific urgency of a sense that recognizes emotional density in the air around it and wants very much to start processing. I kept my hands at my sides. "You kept him away from me," I said slowly. "For 8 months. I kept us from a conversation I was not prepared for," she said, "which was selfish. I know that. That is a considerable understatement." "Yes," she agreed, "it is." A sound from the living room. The specific shift of someone moving from sleep toward consciousness. We both heard it. Diane's eyes moved briefly past my shoulder and then came back to me with something in them that looked almost like relief, which made no sense at all until she said the next thing. "He did not fall out of love with me because of someone else," she said, quiet and precise. "He fell out of love with me because he had never quite fully arrived. I think I always knew what he was looking for. I just convinced myself that eventually it would be me. The flaw had taken on the specific quality of something I could no longer entirely trust." "Diane," I said carefully. "I did not come back for him," she said. She lifted the box slightly. "I came for my grandmother's serving dish and the rest of my books." The press release smile returned, smaller now and more genuine for its imperfection. "And maybe to apologize to you for the boundaries that were never actually about liability." Behind me, I heard Callum's voice, rough with sleep and confusion. "Diane." She looked past me, at him. He was in the doorway of the living room, blanket gone, hair thoroughly wrecked, taking in the scene with the specific expression of a man whose two separate worlds have just quietly, devastatingly collided. The silence between the three of us had weight and shape and edges. "I will get my things," Diane said pleasantly. She reached into her pocket, produced her key, and held it out to me. "For the building manager file," she said. "Since that one has been with you all along." I took the key. Her fingers brushed my palm. Not intentional, just the accidental contact of an exchange. 1 second of her history arrived in my chest like a quiet detonation. A conversation in this very hallway, Diane on her phone, voice low and controlled, saying, "He looks at that apartment like it has something he cannot name, and I am tired of pretending I do not see it." Then nothing. The vision closed. I stood in my doorway, holding 2 keys that did not belong to me, the morning light coming in pale and honest through the window at the end of the hall, and looked at Callum Weston, who was looking at me with an expression I now had context for in a way I absolutely had not had 30 seconds ago. 8 months of silence. Not indifference. Something else entirely. "Callum," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which was impressive because what I felt was approximately the emotional equivalent of standing in an open field, watching weather arrive from every direction simultaneously. "How much did you hear?" he said quietly. "Enough," I said. He closed his eyes briefly. "Ezra, I did not know she told you to." "I know," I said. "I should have introduced myself regardless. I should have." "You should have," I agreed. "But we are going to have to put that conversation somewhere we can both find it later, because right now your wife is in your apartment collecting a serving dish, and I am standing here holding feelings I was not prepared to have. Before 7 in the morning, and I need approximately 4 minutes to process before I say something either very honest or very regrettable." He looked at me. I looked back. 4 minutes, he said. "Minimum," I said. He nodded once, slowly, like a man who had just been handed a stay of execution and was not entirely sure he deserved it. I went to my room and closed the door. Not slammed, closed. With the careful deliberateness of someone who is holding a significant quantity of feeling in both hands and does not want to spill it on the carpet, I sat on the edge of my bed. 4 minutes, I had said. I was already regretting the specificity of that number, because 4 minutes was simultaneously too long to stand in charged silence, and too short to dismantle and reassemble everything I thought I understood about the last 11 months. Here were the facts as I currently had them. Callum Weston had noticed me the first week I moved in. Diane had seen it. Diane, who was, by all observable evidence, a perceptive and emotionally intelligent person, had recognized something in that noticing that felt threatening enough to construct an entire policy around. A professional boundary that was not actually professional. A rule designed specifically to keep one specific person at a specific distance. 8 months of hallway silence had not been indifference. It had been instruction, and he had followed it. Not because he was weak or careless, but because he was a man who respected boundaries, including ones built to contain feelings he had not been given permission to have out loud. I pressed my palms flat against my knees. My psychometry was doing that thing it did when I was emotionally activated. A low, persistent hum at my fingertips, every surface in the room suddenly feeling more present than usual, the comforter under my hands, the wood of the bed frame, objects absorbing their surroundings constantly, patiently, the way I had been doing for 11 months without admitting it. Cataloguing footsteps, noticing when the light upstairs came on at 3 in the morning, adapting to the rhythm of a presence I had told myself I was merely coexisting with. I was an absolute hypocrite, and the universe had clearly known this for much longer than I had. A knock at my bedroom door. Not the front door, my bedroom door. "Your 4 minutes were up 90 seconds ago," Callum said from the other side. "That is not how grace periods work," I said. Ezra. Something about the way he said my name through a closed door in the early morning. No performance, no careful neutrality, just my name with the full weight of a person who had been waiting to say it properly for a significant amount of time, did something genuinely unreasonable to my cardiovascular system. I stood up, opened the door. He was leaning against the opposite wall of the narrow hallway, arms crossed, bare feet on my hardwood floor. His expression was the most unguarded I had seen it, and I had now seen it in several compromised conditions, including midnight confusion, accidental sleep, and the specific horror of arriving at an unexpected intersection of past and present at 6:47 in the morning. "She is gone," he said. "She got her things. She said to tell you she is sorry, and that the November rent should transfer automatically, and you should call her if there are any maintenance issues going forward." "Very efficient," I said. "She is good at that," he said. And this time the past tense did not carry grief, just recognition. Honest and clean. "Callum, I know what you are going to say. Do you? That this is too fast. That you live in my building, and that makes it complicated. That last night was an unusual circumstance, and it would be reasonable to let things return to a normal distance and see how everything settles before anyone does anything inadvisable." I looked at him. "That is a very thorough list," I said. "I have been standing against this wall for 4 minutes thinking about it. And I think all of it is reasonable and probably correct." He held my gaze without flinching. "I also think I spent 8 months following a rule that was never mine to follow in the first place, and I am 34 years old and genuinely tired of choosing reasonable over honest. My pulse was doing something it had no professional justification for doing. I should tell you something," I said. "Okay, the key. Last night, when I held it." I kept my voice level and direct, because this was the only way I knew how to handle things I could not afford to be indirect about. What I felt was not just grief and memory. There was something else stored in it, something recent. He went very still. "The last time you held that key and thought about your father," I said carefully, "you were sitting in a parked car outside this building. Not upstairs, outside. Like you had come home and stopped before you got there." I paused. "You do that sometimes, do you not? Stop just before." The hallway was very quiet. "Yes," he said. "Why?" He looked at me for a long moment. The morning light from the living room window was reaching us at an angle now, pale gold and unhurried, and in it Callum Weston looked exactly like what he was. A man who had spent a long time being responsible and contained and present for everything except the specific thing he actually needed. "Because I did not trust what I would do if I stopped pretending I did not want to," he said. The sentence arrived in the room and stayed there. I took one step forward. He did not move back. "Here is what I know," I said. "I know that you are technically still my landlord, which is a complication. I know that Diane left 26 days ago, and the responsible timeline advice would be to wait and see. I know that I have exactly one rule I have never broken in 3 years of careful, solitary living. Rule 3, he said softly. Mind your business. I looked up at him. I opened the door anyway. Something shifted in his expression. The last layer of careful construction came down with the specific quiet of something that had been holding on past the point of usefulness and finally decided to let go. He moved first. One hand came up slowly, giving me every opportunity to step back, and when I did not, his fingers curved around my jaw with a gentleness so deliberate it felt like a question still waiting for an answer. Ezra, he said. Callum, I said back. And then his mouth was on mine. It was not urgent. That was the thing I had not expected. No crash of relief or desperation. Just warmth, steady and patient. The specific quality of a kiss from someone who has been waiting long enough that they are in absolutely no hurry now that they have arrived. My hands found the front of his shirt. His thumb traced my cheekbone like he was learning something by touch. I kissed him back with everything I had been telling myself for 11 months was just ambient atmospheric awareness of a neighbour's presence, and not, in fact, this. When we separated, it was by approximately 2 inches, and neither of us went further than that. His forehead came down to rest against mine. I could feel his pulse where my hands were still gripping his shirt. Fast, not steady at all, which was deeply satisfying given how calm he appeared on the outside. That was inadvisable, I said. Completely, he agreed. He did not move. We should probably talk about the landlord situation. Probably. And the timeline. Yes. And the fact that I can read the emotional history of your belongings, which is a level of intimacy most relationships do not reach for several years. That is a fair point, he said. His voice had dropped to something low and unhurried that was doing nothing helpful for my ability to be sensible. Are you going to step back? I considered the question with genuine seriousness. Not yet, I said. His exhale was warm against my face. Outside, the Maryland morning was fully arriving now, gold light filling the window at the end of the hall, the neighborhood beginning to stir. Somewhere, a car started. A dog barked twice and stopped. The ordinary world, reassembling itself around a moment it had no idea was happening. I stood in my hallway with my forehead against Callum Weston's and thought about brass keys and chamomile tea and the specific weight of 8 months of silence that had never actually been empty. You are going to have to get a new key made, I said. He laughed. Actually laughed, quiet and real, and the sound of it landed in my chest like the first warm thing after a very long winter. Yeah, he said. I know. He said it like a man who had just remembered that some problems were good ones to have. The kind that meant you were somewhere real instead of somewhere safe. His hand was still curved around my jaw, not gripping, just resting. The way a person holds something they are not ready to put down but are no longer afraid of dropping. I stepped back, eventually, not far, just enough to breathe at a functional capacity, which had become genuinely necessary. Okay, I said. Okay, he agreed. I am going to make coffee, I said. And you are going to sit at my kitchen table like a person. And we are going to have an actual conversation in daylight like 2 adults who did not just. I gestured between us with considerable eloquence. Kiss in a hallway at 7 in the morning, he supplied. I was going to say make a series of emotionally significant decisions before breakfast, but yes, that. The corner of his mouth moved. Coffee sounds good. I turned toward the kitchen with the dignity of a man who had absolutely everything under control, which was a complete fiction, but a well-maintained one. He followed me in and sat at the small kitchen table without being asked twice, which I noted approvingly. I had no patience for people who hovered in kitchens, either sit or leave. He sat, folded his hands on the table, and watched me move through the space with the quiet attention of someone who was in no hurry to be anywhere else. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed. I need to say something, he said. You are going to say it whether I give you permission or not, so go ahead. I should have knocked on your door a long time ago, he said. Not last night, months ago, the first week. With my own keys in my pocket and no excuse other than wanting to introduce myself to the person I could not stop noticing in my own building. He paused. I let someone else's fear become my behavior, and that was not fair to you. I am sorry for the 8 months. I set 2 mugs on the counter. Callum, I mean it. I know you do. I turned to look at him, and I accept it. Not because it did not matter, but because I think you have spent a very long time apologizing for things while they were still happening instead of after. And I want you to know that after counts. I held his gaze. It counts with me. Something settled in his expression, quiet and significant, the specific relief of a weight set down in a place that can actually hold it. The building, he said after a moment. The landlord situation. I want to be honest about it. Please. Diane and I are handling the property separation with a lawyer. It is not contentious. She is taking 2 of the other properties. I am keeping this one. But the paperwork takes time. He looked at me steadily. I am not asking you to pretend the complication does not exist. I am asking if it is something you are willing to navigate alongside me while I sort it out. I poured the coffee. I read the histories of objects for a living, I said, sliding his mug across the table. I do consulting work for insurance companies, estate lawyers, and the occasional very confused antique dealer. I have navigated complicated situations in stranger configurations than this one. That is not a yes, he said. It is absolutely a yes, I said. It is just a yes with full awareness of the variables, which is the only kind of yes I give. He looked at his coffee, then at me. Then he picked up the mug with both hands, the way he had in the vision. Except, this time, there was no second mug pushed to the far side of the counter, going cold and untouched. Both mugs were here, both warm. The psychometry, he said. Does it ever stop being something you have to manage? No, I said honestly. But it gets easier when the environment is calm, when I am not fighting my own instincts constantly. I sat down across from him. Suppressants keep the edges soft. The right environment keeps the volume low. What does the wrong environment feel like? Loud. Like trying to have a conversation in a room where every surface is shouting at you. I wrapped my hands around my mug. I have moved a lot, looking for the right kind of quiet. He was looking at me with that steady, focused attention again. Is this quiet? He said. Here. I thought about it honestly. The 11 months, the amber lamp, the specific ambient warmth of this apartment that I had always attributed to good insulation and the luck of a south-facing window. Yes, I said. Mostly. You paced a lot at 3 a.m. He had the decency to look slightly abashed. I will work on that. You do not have to, I adapted. I took a sip of my coffee. I kind of liked knowing someone else was awake. The morning light was fully gold now, coming through the kitchen window and lying in warm rectangles across the floor. The coffee was good. The chair was comfortable. The man across the table was looking at me like I was something he had found in an unexpected place and was still working out the wonder of. It was a lot for a Tuesday. Ezra, he said. Callum, I am going to get that key made today. I know. And then I am going to come back downstairs and knock on your door. He paused. Properly this time. In daylight, with a reasonable explanation prepared. What is the explanation? That I would like to take you somewhere for dinner, he said. A real one, with a reservation and everything, because you deserve at minimum a full meal and an evening where I introduce myself correctly. My chest did the same complicated thing it had been doing since approximately midnight, except this time I did not feel the need to walk it off in a kitchen. I know a place in Ellicott City, I said. Good food, quiet enough that my psychometry does not turn the evening into an emotional obstacle course. Ellicott City, he said. I know it. Saturday, I said. Saturday, he agreed. He drank his coffee. I drank mine. Outside, Colombia was fully awake now, the neighborhood moving through its morning with the comfortable reliability of a place that did not know or care what was quietly beginning inside one specific ground floor apartment. Gerald, the succulent, caught the light on the windowsill, perfectly alive and requiring almost nothing, which I had always found deeply aspirational. After a while, Callum stood up, carried his mug to the sink, and rinsed it with the natural ease of someone who had forgotten to be a guest. I noticed. I did not say anything about it. He picked up his father's key from the coffee table on his way to the door, turning it once in his fingers with the unconscious habit of 11 years. Then he stopped at the front door and looked back at me. "Thank you," he said, "for opening the door." "You knocked," I said. "That part was you." He smiled. A full one this time, unhurried and real, the kind that had clearly just remembered it was allowed to exist. He let himself out. I stood in my living room in the morning quiet, one mug still warm in my hand, and listened to his footsteps go up the stairs. Not the insomniac pacing of before, even, steady. The sound of someone walking toward something instead of around it. I sat back down in my armchair, picked up my book, found the paragraph I had been failing to read since midnight. This time, it made complete sense. I was not good at Rule 3. I had never been good at Rule 3. But standing in doorways and opening them anyway had given me Gerald, and this apartment, and a riverstone from a road trip that hummed with borrowed joy. And apparently now, a man with his father's key in his pocket who was going to come back downstairs on Saturday and take me somewhere worth dressing up for. Some rules, I decided, were worth being bad at. The lamp was still on. I left it,